right. So hi, everyone. It's Nina Collins from the Woolfer. I'm here today with Gabrielle Hartley to talk about divorce. Gabrielle is a divorce lawyer, mediator. She wrote a book called Better Apart that was published about 2 years ago.
Exactly. 2019.
When we met for the first time in person. And I realized that on the Woolfer platform, we don't have a basic divorce 101 kind of primer. So I asked Gabrielle to write something up and thought we would talk about what are the main issues in midlife divorce to think about. So welcome. Really glad to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. So I don't know, do you want to ask me questions? You want me to just tell you about it?
I mean, we can launch into it. So just so people know a little more about you, you live in Northampton, you're married.
Yep. I grew up in Brooklyn. I lived in Brooklyn till I was 34. And since the pandemic, I haven't been back all that much, but my heart's in New York City, but I live in Northampton, Massachusetts.
And little kids, I seem to recall.
I have three boys, okay. 2 teenagers and a 9-year-old.
And what's the bulk of your practice? Is it divorce, mediation? I know you do.
It's all, so what I do myself is I do all online mediation and I do divorce strategy coaching. People who aren't sure which way to go, or they have a lawyer who they feel is maybe pushing them one way or the other way. So I do consultations. I also train new mediators and lawyers who want to practice differently in a method of closing their case differently. It's the Better Apart method. And then I'm of counsel to a very aggressive firm in Manhattan for people who call me who say, I really want to mediate, but and then they tell me about their spouse and it's clear that they cannot mediate.
They need to litigate. Yeah.
Yeah. So I am of counsel to a top litigator in Manhattan. So
you do some litigation.
Yeah. But I personally, what I do in those cases is I continue to sort of hold the hand and divorce strategize where the litigator does the litigation. Yeah, it's amazing.
Also, I think that space where you can consult with people, because I think someone told me, my boyfriend's a corporate litigator, and I think he told me, or someone told me, that the typical person going through divorce changes lawyers once or twice. It's very, very common to be frustrated with your lawyer.
It is very common, which is the first tenet of the Better Apart method is working on your patience. And I know we're going to talk about the things you need to know, nuts and bolts, but let's just talk for a second about conceptually.
Yeah, please. When
you're getting divorced, the number one tip I have is a step back is the best way forward. Mm-hmm. And I actually think that that's a lesson for life.
In
our greater society today.
My number one divorce, I've been divorced 3 times. I mean, really only twice, but technically 3 times. And
another television show.
My number one piece of advice is don't litigate if you can. I mean, litigation is a fucking nightmare. I've never done it in a divorce. I've done it in a couple other scenarios, but
it is so dumb I mean,
I agree. It's so dumb.
I work
is spending the money that you're fighting over, really.
Right. And so when I was about 30, I worked for Judge Sunshine, who's the chief administrative divorce court judge in New York now. And he, for a year and a half, he and I were the only judge and court attorney in the whole borough of Staten Island. And I was about 30 years old. So it was pretty high pressure job at that time. And what always came to mind was the concept of there's no pot of gold at the end of this rainbow, right? So my job was, I saw you when you were about to go to trial, and my job was to help you to avoid trial. And that's how I actually got into this whole thing. It's my backstory is my parents divorced really well. They had joint custody in Brooklyn in the 80s. Mm. And then I went to law school.
Right, because back then
very unusual. And I went to law school. I took family law pass fail because I was so sick of this topic. Mm-hmm. And then I wound up working for this judge, and I saw how messed up the process was. And
so typically what happens is people fight and they get right to where they're about to go into the courtroom, and then it settles, right? So you're spending a lot of money on deposition and arguing, fighting, and there's actually, Okay.
And I mean, honestly, I mediate, I always say I'm Encyclopedia Brown. No case too big or too small. So no, really, I mean, I do mediations that are just, 5 or 6 hours. And then I do mediations that are multi-million dollars, where I have sometimes even a co-mediator. I have a certified divorce financial analyst, evaluator. You know, it doesn't mean it's simple just because it's mediated. It just means that you're working toward the goal of resolution.
But when you're a mediator, does the other side have a mediator? No, it's just
no. So the mediator is the impartial, third party, neutral. Okay.
Yeah.
So I do mediation online, so I can really do it anywhere in the country. I mostly do it in New York and Massachusetts because that is where I'm a licensed attorney. But if somebody read my book and they really want me to do it, I can do it. And then I create a memorandum of understanding for them. So I always tell people to seek counsel just to find out what their rights are.
Yeah.
What are the range of outcomes? So this advice really applies to if you're, 30 or 60 or 80, like whatever you're entitled to. Remember, the law is, it's an art, not a science. And there's no right or wrong. I was doing a talk with Laura Wasser, and I think we were in Chicago, and she was saying to a big group of people something about like, you don't need a prenup if you have an inheritance necessarily. And, and I chimed in that, actually in Massachusetts you do, because it can be considered marital property. And it's really interesting because she's like top lawyer in the country. And yet like the advice you give in California is going to be different than the advice you're going to give in Massachusetts. Even between New York and Massachusetts, there are distinctions. So,
and I would advise someone, if you have an inheritance, I mean, you should still have a prenup just to protect yourself. Because
oh my gosh, 100,000% you need a prenup. I'm a big fan of prenups. I actually have an ebook that's about to come out that's called What You Need to Know Before You Get Married. And the big reveal is like, you probably need a prenup, even though you don't realize you need a prenup.
Yeah, I think
there's more to it than that.
Great. I have to say, I had a prenup for my last marriage, and it was so great. Like,
it just makes it easier.
It's been an easier divorce. Exactly. It was a $5,000 prenup. It was a $5,000 divorce. It was like
exactly, and that's like all it should be. And that's the thing. So the things that you need to be aware of, especially for women who are over 40 and say you're professional. There's a lot of shame around not knowing your finances. It's really, really prevalent. So if you're listening to this and you feel like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm so stupid, you're flooding yourself with shame and self-doubt. Just know you are just so not alone. I have represented presidents of hospitals. I've represented even like bankers who just are not paying attention to their own money. They may have a lot of money. They may not have a lot of money.
Yeah.
There are also like a lot of high net worth people who spend all their money. And then when they get divorced, they think that money was hidden.
And in fact, they've just spent it.
They've just spent it. So,
so the lesson, I mean, I'm so about not shaming people, obviously, but I can't stress enough to women when they're getting divorced, how much you need to be realistic about what you have and what you need.
Correct.
They just put their head in the sand. Like, I remember when I got my main divorce, the father of my 4 kids, and it was like that was a big divorce. It was a big situation, right? And I was in my 30s and I had all these children. I remember putting together a list of what I thought my expenses were going to be. And you have to get down to the really nitty gritty.
Granular. Nina, that
is gas.
Everything. Birthday parties.
Remembering that every year there are unexpected things.
Right. You need to.
Right. Like your roof is going to collapse.
Right. Everything. And also there are certain limits, like the law has limits, but like the first thing you really need to know is what there is. So when it comes to the financial part, there's 4 things. There's assets, that's what you have. There's debts, that's what you owe. There's assets, there's income, that's what you make. And then there's expenses, that's what you spend, right? And like the balance sheet might not work out, but that's okay. You're here now, and this is the first day of the rest of your life.
That's right.
And like, I'm a big believer in the mashup. Like people come in with their positions. I want this, I want that. But when you get beneath what they want, so what you want, that's the what. But what you need, that's the why, that's the interests. Right. So you need to sort of table the wants for a while, figure out what each person needs. What do you need? What do they need? If you can actually figure out what your soon-to-be ex needs, now that you might be thinking like, why am I thinking about him? Because if you can figure out how to give him what he wants, or what he needs rather,
Right.
he is going to emotionally settle.
Right.
And when he or she, shouldn't be sexist, when your partner emotionally settles, they're going to be more magnanimous and give you more. Even that like narcissist, and I say that with air quotes, sorry, because everybody thinks
everyone is married to everyone's
a narcissist. Everyone is not a narcissist. I do appreciate that the bundle of traits that one calls narcissism exists, and it's convenient, right?
I'm totally with you on this, Gabrielle. We do pieces about narcissism all the time because literally everyone who's getting divorced says they're divorcing a narcissist.
It's just not, and the forensic evaluations will support that too, because I think when you're getting divorced, you become a little bit tunnel vision, right? It becomes about like survival.
Yeah.
So it's like sometimes during divorce people get violent. Sometimes people during divorce get narcissistic. I mean, it's just the way, that's what happens. Oh yeah, I forgot. Right.
Yeah,
exactly. It's just, we're just human, right? So like,
it's a very scary time. I mean, it's
really a very scary time. And even if you've got it all together, especially if it's not your choice, but even if it is your choice, it is scary.
I know people often ask me why I was so angry and upset when I got divorced, because it was my choice. And it was hard to explain, like that you feel like you're losing a limb. I mean, it's so primal. You know, you create a family, you have money. I mean, it's why I think it's so hard. I see women all the time who are people, but I deal with mostly women who are in really unhappy situations. And it's just so hard to comprehend getting divorced, even though they know.
Even though it's totally the right thing. And you know what else is weird? Like I've worked with a lot of women who they might have left for somebody else. They might have felt like really separate in an emotional, physical, spiritual way. But then when their spouse moves on, they get depressed.
Yeah.
And they get angry.
Yeah.
And they get litigious. And we talk about it and we strategize around it. And, you know, I think just giving yourself permission to be human is like really game changing.
Great advice. Yeah.
You know, I do want to circle back for a second to just talk a little bit more about positions and interests. So whenever we want anything, we get like so super fixated on the thing that we want. Now I'm going to use a really simple example, which is like, I want the house, right?
Yeah.
But really what you want is security. You want stability, right? Like, and what's that about? It's about fear, right?
Totally.
And the same thing is the case on the other side. So if you're just tuning in now, we're talking about like how to get everything that you need and want out of your divorce when you're getting divorced, regardless of your age. The best thing to do is to really drill down on what your soon-to-be ex's insecurities are. Not to use them as a sword, but to hand them something with compassion. And I don't mean to sound like some woo-woo crazy lawyer, but like the truth is, when we operate from a place of compassion, just bear with me, it's actually almost like self-serving, because you're going to get more of what you want by giving the other person more of what they need. So you give what
it is totally wise. I have to say, I couldn't in a million years have done that when I was getting divorced. And I don't know if that was my age.
Well, you were young and you had 4 kids.
I was not young. I was in my 30s. I was not emotionally healed enough, developed enough. I regret it. I wish I had been able to do a better apart divorce, you know, where we were really kind to each other and became friends. And I 100% agree with you. That's the way to do it.
But I will say, you know, it doesn't mean you're going to be friends, but it's never too late to shift the energy. You know, I have,
no, we're good now. We're very close to each other. I mean, now 15 years later, you know, we've apologized. We've figured
that's amazing.
We're
that's
fine.
Awesome.
But I agree with you. I see people, you know, even, I mean, relationships I've subsequently had with people who've been divorced and they have such difficult relationships. And of course, it's better for everyone if there's compassion and kindness and love and everyone.
And I don't mean you have to be like, I mean, believe me, I'm sure if I were in this situation, I'd be like as angry as the next person, right? And as derailed as the next person. It's just always about coming back to the goal, right? Like I do this thing with the mediators that I'm training. It's called the close process. Okay. And this is the goal is like, I'm trying to shift people who've been litigators for 25 years, who have like 35 employees, and then they close shop and they want to be top mediators, but their brain is just wired to fight.
Oh,
So
interesting.
they come to me, they do a mediation training,
Yeah,
and then they come to me and they do like an upper level mediation training.
Mhm.
And let me just sort of break it down for you. So the close process is like that. Clarify. C. It's an acronym. It's so stupid, but like it's a nice container for
They're good.
litigation,
They're useful. Yeah.
right? So C is for clarify.
Mhm.
What are your goals and expectations? That's the most important thing on a macro level and on a micro level. So the goal is, to have a nice divorce. That's the big goal. Then when you come into parenting, it might be to have peaceful interactions with my ex, right? Like you have to like state the goal to yourself.
Yeah.
The next thing is, excuse me, to listen with incredible intentionality, both to what your inner cravings are, what you need, and to listen to see not just what your ex-spouse needs, but where they're at emotionally. If they're in the hot mess stage and you're like moved on, just be aware of that. Of course, again, this is a training for the professional, but I'm just sharing it with you.
No, it's really helpful. It's interesting. Yeah.
Okay, so then is the optimization. So it's clarify, listen, then optimizing is where we are, we're really sussing out what are our positions versus our interests.
Mhm.
What are our wants versus our needs? And you keep going back to the goal. It's like an iterative process.
Right. And I think an example of that is that a lot of women, when their kids are younger, want more custody. And it might not be the most reasonable thing. It might be that we really should do 50-50. So it's like, what's your want? What's everyone's need?
Right.
And kind of.
And also, I think, I don't want to, I could talk about that for like 2 hours, but just really briefly, women who are younger, who are getting divorced, they might want full custody, but they also might not be thinking forward, because really then they're not going to be able to work, then they're going to be stuck without money. It's quite complicated.
Yeah, no, I always say that too. I mean, I get it.
I don't know if you know Emma Johnson and her work.
No.
Well, we can talk about that offline, but anyway. So the next step, so we did clarify, listen, optimize, then it's strategize. So how are we going to do the mashup? How are we going to bring our ability to like sort of meld our head and our heart and get to really able to listen and able to hear, so that we can reach the final step, which is end, ease, right? So it's clarify, listen, optimize, strategize, end. And then I always say rinse and repeat, because it's the gift that keeps on giving, right? It's like, so the strategize, that's the better part method. That's like patience. Is there, is somebody just wanted over? Do you have to slow yourself down? Remember, I said
at the beginning, kind of step back to step forward. So
exactly,
slow down and breathe.
Exactly. Is it around respect? Are you surrounding yourself with people who are making you feel like crap, right? Like creating boundaries is a big one in respect, right? Are you feeling, is it around peace? So peace is like you're feeling ill at ease, like a disease, right? So how do you ameliorate that? It doesn't mean like, you're going to be like fluffy clouds and rainbows and unicorns, but it's about reaching a place of equanimity.
Yeah.
Neutrality, noticing the neutral is a big one.
What's so interesting about all this, like this is all such great life advice in general.
Totally.
So if we all lived this way, it would be perfect. And unfortunately, I mean, I'm sure lots of people can do this, and then some people can't just because of where they are in their lives when they're getting divorced. But it sounds like you've developed an amazing program. I mean,
so it's I mean, like, look,
you're
like
really coaching people. It's life coaching in a lot of ways.
It is. It's just a little expensive for life coaching. So I stick to the divorce. Like if anybody wanted to work with me as a life coach, that would be fine. They're more likely to pay my hourly rate if they're embroiled in a divorce.
Yeah.
But so the better part, I mean, I would just say about better part, even if you're not getting divorced, if you pick it up, I mean, these themes were hard arrived at, hard learned, right? Like the whole idea of how we're all, and me included, we're all complicit in our own undoings.
Yes,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
And so, I spent a lot of time in my own marriage being really angry at my husband. I'm allowed to talk about this. I've got to, because he traveled a lot. He works for the government. He was like, then he'd come home, he'd go, I married a guy from rural Maine. He like hunts and he'd go running, and I was home with the 3 kids, and I was like pissed all the time, right? And I felt like I was working so hard, and it was just, I felt like it was so unfair. And then one day it hit me. It was actually the day that Gwyneth Paltrow came out saying that she had a conscious uncoupling.
Oh, okay.
I said, I'm writing the conscious uncoupling book, not realizing that there was Catherine Woodward Thomas who already wrote the book, but that's okay. I said, I'm going to write the conversation changing divorce book, and Gwyneth is going to endorse it. And that is exactly what happened.
Amazing.
I took control of my own life, right?
Yeah.
I stopped being pissed at him.
Yeah.
And I started to like go to yoga more. I started to just own my own.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. It's ultimately, it really is about boundaries and staying in your own lane, right?
It really
Stop putting
is.
everything out. You can only control what you can control about your own life and what you need. And instead of kind of throwing everything out on other people. Yeah. I mean, it's a huge life lesson.
I mean, this is no big news, but like when you're getting divorced, if you take one practical tip away from this with getting divorced, it's like, get your gosh darn disclosures done. And if you haven't decided to file yet, start gathering the documents, because you don't want to be paying tens and, you know, hundreds, honestly, thousands of dollars searching down documents that you could just pull off the computer. It is so important.
Right. I mean, one of the things I always say, like, lawyers don't know your situation. You know your situation better than anyone else does. So, right. So you should collect all your financial information, as you said, your assets, your debts, your income, your expenses. Figuring out that before you even talk to anyone is, I think,
it's really necessary. And like, here's another tip. If you're going to a mediator, go and listen to strategy, listen to ideas. Do not agree to anything in your first meeting, maybe not even in your first 2 meetings, because what happens, we humans anchor to what we hear, right? We anchor to positions. So if you say, well, maybe $3,500 a month is good. Maybe I can live with that. Mm-hmm. Now your ex-wife or your ex-husband, soon to be, just heard that. Mm-hmm. And then they're going to keep, well, you said you could live on $3,500, but then you're going to meet with your lawyer, or maybe you didn't even meet with your lawyer, but then you did a budget sheet.
Yeah. Then you remember you have to pay for whatever. Yeah. And you realize it's not going to. And
then the other person is like anchored to the position, the statement that you sloppily put out there, because you're just thinking out loud. So process in your head. This is a good time to learn to, think it, don't say it, like my kid's first grade teacher used to say. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So a lot of your advice really is to slow down, have someone good you can talk it through with, get organized financially.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to say, when you're done, make sure you get a new estates plan. That's super important.
I was going to come to that too. That was actually part of my divorce agreement, that we both had to do new wills.
It's a part of, you have to. And most of us, like I have lawyers who I have relationships with, most divorce lawyers have estates planners who they work with. I have actually estates planners all over the country, because it's so necessary to work with an estates planner after you get divorced, whether or not you have significant resources, even to just decide.
It's crucial. People forget, like my mother actually never did it, and she didn't change the beneficiary on her life insurance at City College where she taught. And so then when she died, all of her life insurance went to my father, who she was divorced from. So he wasn't part of the estate. So it was taxed at 50%. Like, it was insanely stupid. So God. Yeah, you have to see an estate lawyer when you get divorced.
You really do. I mean, that's like an incredible, real example.
Yeah. Yeah.
So also, like, I'd say your viewers are probably dealing with kids who are going to college, right? And so if your agreement is silent as to who's paying for college expenses, and that your kids are in high school, even if they're just a freshman or a sophomore, it's a good time to start talking about it. Yeah. There are a lot of new rules and regulations about how you want the custody to look in the agreement that are going to impact how the financial aid is going to shake down.
I'm always surprised that people typically pay child support
and
college.
Yeah, that's the law still. It is starting to change. But, it's very interesting. This is actually a pretty complicated topic. I I have a very good friend who runs a college planning program, and she actually texted me the other day. She's like, all the laws are changing next year. I was like, oh my gosh. But, it's pretty complicated. It's pretty interesting. The laws are still that child support gets paid even when the kids go to college. And that's because, like, you have to maintain the household.
You have to maintain the household for them to come home to. Yeah.
But you have to remember the laws are created with like a broad brushstroke for everybody. So it might not really make sense for you. Like if you each have a good living and you don't really need the money, like query as to whether you have to keep collecting it. I mean, maybe you need it, maybe you want it, maybe, and maybe not, right? So
yeah.
That's a very personal thing. But
yeah, I mean, that I've only witnessed as a woman who dates divorced men. It often seems unfair that they're paying all this child support. I mean, again, it's like, who's to say? Well,
it's funny. Every time I have a mediation, like one of the first things I say before we even start, I say, here's the thing. I know you both want to be fair, and I'm pretty sure that each of your sense of fair is going to be slightly different from each other. So I'm just going to say, I recognize you both want to be fair. I believe you that whatever you say is fair in your perspective and whatever you say is fair from your perspective. And they're probably not going to match, and it doesn't matter. And it doesn't mean you're bad. So let's just like erase that. And
you'd be such a fun divorce mediator.
I am a very fun divorce mediator. I know. It's actually funny. My husband's always like, what do you do? Because now we're like in two sides of our basement. He's like, what are you doing in there? He's like, you're like laughing so much. I'm like, ay. Well,
I just think for divorce.
Well, it's hard. It's not like it's funny. And it is, I just kind of feel like it's just life. I'm just trying to like help you like get through this hard part of your life. It doesn't need to become like a television procedural.
Yeah, no, that's a good way of looking at it. And so for our viewers, I mean, yeah, you're right. Most of them probably are verging on empty nest or kind of in that phase. I mean, typically, obviously, custody starts to go.
Oh, I was going to say, look, just about the college thing, they have to have the conversation starting when your kid is a sophomore, because there's going to be so much drama around them applying, taking their SAT, applying to school. You want to at least start talking about who's paying what and how.
Mm-hmm.
And, you may also look at your separation agreement and see if the right person has custody. So you might consult with a local lawyer about that.
What do you mean the right person has custody?
Well, if it's kind of 50-50, but the kid is more with the mom and the mom makes a lot less money and the mom just agreed to 50-50, but it really makes sense for the mom to have full custody and she's going to get better financial aid with the full custody.
Got it.
It's a good time to rewrite that agreement.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Because a lot of times people say 50-50, even though it's not really, just because like they don't care and whatever.
Right.
But then at the end of the day,
college applications,
it could actually have a real impact. So, it's just something to think about. If you truly have 50-50, I'm not suggesting that you say otherwise, but if you don't, now's the time to fix it.
And I'm thinking about women who are getting married for the second or third time. Do you do prenups? Do you advise women?
Absolutely. Even more so the second time, because chances are you're coming in with kids, you're coming in with stuff. There are certain things that you cannot negotiate, but they mostly all have to do with your children. And especially if you have pre-existing children, there are things that you can put into like a whole plan where your new spouse is also taken care of, God forbid, of anything. You can get like a life insurance policy.
Right.
So I definitely.
I mean, it seems like with prenups, the things you want to think about, you want to protect yourself. I mean, obviously you're protecting your assets when you die. You're saying you want to bypass the spouse. And the only way you can do that is with a prenup, right? To say that everything that's mine is going to go straight to my children. And then you can make clauses to give to the spouse if you've been married more than 5 years or more than 10 years or.
Exactly. Sunset clause. It's like a sunset clause. So that's exactly what you do. You have to be careful though with prenups with first time marriages. They're hard. Sometimes when I get a case where one person has a trust fund and the other person just has a job, to say they're a social worker and they make $60,000 a year, but they're going to live this much bigger life, but they're really young and they really don't want the person to feel like they're going after their money. And there's a tendency to give away too much. So that's hard. Like as the attorney, I really struggle with those. I don't like doing those at all. But
that does sound hard. Yeah, I mean, I have some concerns about that with my own kids when I think about inheritance. Prenups are really tricky. I wish in a way they would just become completely standard. because they are really hard and touchy and make everyone uncomfortable, but they're very, very, very useful.
But almost making it standard would be like just changing the laws,
Right.
right?
Good
So
point.
like,
Yes.
and depending where you live, like separate property remains separate, but it just depends. Have you been relying on that property to support you? Well, then is it imputed income? I mean, there's a lot of very complicated issues. What I would say to you is if you have a lot of money, if you don't have a prenup, just wrap your head around the fact that you're going to have to give some of it should your marriage derail. You just, that's just the way it's going to be. And maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe you don't care.
And maybe you want to, right? You've been married to someone for 20 years. They're your family. You care about them. You want them to have a good chunk.
And it doesn't mean you're going to have to give them half of it, but you're going to have to give them something. And it might be annoying, but it might be annoying because maybe, you know, they cheated on you and they didn't really pull their weight in the marriage. And, you know, I mean, it's complicated. It's all complicated.
You must see everything.
I do see everything, you know, every time I think I've seen everything, I see something new. So
what makes you most frustrated about your job or sad about your job?
Frustrated. You know, I love my job now. I really do. Cause I really attracted like the just right clients. My clients are like people, you know, they're complicated, they're messy, but they're like human and they mess things up. They call and apologize. Like I no longer have crazy people screaming at me.
Great.
I don't know. My job now, I just love it. Like I did not love litigating. I have a lot of friends who are litigators and they're very necessary. And as I said, I'm of counsel to a big firm in Manhattan. I'm also affiliated with a firm in, in Boston. And, you couldn't pay me to do that stuff. Like I just hated it. It's like not my vibe. I don't want it to be my vibe. I spent a long time feeling less than, because when you're a lawyer and you're doing mediation, the other lawyers look at you like you're not really a lawyer. Yeah. And it was very annoying. And it wasn't, I mean, honestly, I think what made me brave enough to stop was like HarperCollins and Gwyneth Paltrow and People magazine, right? I got
getting affirmation. Yeah. And then you were like, fuck you. I do something really important. Yeah.
Exactly. But I honestly didn't have the courage to just do it. Like, I didn't know if I'd make enough money. I didn't know. It was just like a whole thing. And I'm being, I always say, everybody's always talking about being authentic. And I'm like, I need to work on being less authentic.
No, that's really great. I mean, what you're saying is you kind of set out what you wanted to do and you made it happen. You said you were going to do this thing. And I remember when I first met you in person.
That's when I started.
You had just published the book, and publishing a book is a humbling experience. It's not easy. And, but it sounds like it's really done for you exactly what you wanted it to do, which
it's done for people. And now I've been able to like really help other people. I just want to make sure before we stop, did we touch on enough of the topics?
Well, we're publishing a piece of written content by Gabrielle that's literally, I think, 10 things. I don't have it in front of me, but it's really point by point, kind of divorce 101 for the middle age. So that will be published alongside this interview. And I think we covered a lot of really good topics, just really important. I mean, honestly, to me, the most important thing we talked about in the very beginning is really understanding your finances. And then all the emotional stuff you talked about kind of taking a step back, really trying to have some compassion, because it will ultimately elicit compassion from the other side.
Compassion for yourself too.
Compassion for yourself. Right.
It's like, remember, when you're giving, you're going to receive. If you're not receiving from them, you're going to receive it from the universe. You just are.
One of the things I always learned from Brene Brown is that idea that if you're vulnerable, it's hard for people to attack you when you're being open and authentic.
Totally. I mean, I am dealing with some pretty complicated situations right now. And I own my clumsiness with my language. I just own it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm screwing this up. Please don't because it's hard. And that's
a beautiful thing to say. I own my clumsiness. I love it, because as you keep saying, we are just human and we do make mistakes. And luckily at this point, we have also learned a lot. So we have a lot to offer. So it's all kind of a big mess, and it's
totally. And it's like amazing being 50. Like I love being 50.
I love it too. It's weird actually how much I love it.
It's weird. I'm like dreading, like my skin is getting like, But you just talked about that last night.
Well, I feel the same way. Like I'm going to be 52 in August, and I hate to keep going on and on about how happy I am, but I really just feel at peace in a way that I never
do
could
too.
imagine.
Same, totally. Yeah. Like literally, it's just crazy. But I know it's just weird.
And people said that this would happen like 10 years ago, and I was like, what? Like
I know 40 did not feel so amazing, but 50 is like pretty good. You know, I mean, I guess we've like hit our strides.
I know, although it's funny, we also look like 50-year-old women. Like we're not, it's weird. Like the whole thing is weird.
It is weird, but it's okay. It's all good. I mean, I would be lying if I didn't feel, if I said I didn't feel a little jealous looking at like, you know, we didn't live during selfie times. Like we weren't young during selfie. And all those like cute selfies. I take one, I'm like, oh my God.
I know, me too. It's so funny. I keep saying all week, like I watched the Grammys this week, and I was actually kind of transfixed by these women's bodies. I was like, people look like that? Like it almost
I know. I'm more transfixed by the lack of lines. Like I have terrible lines around my eyes, and I'm like, I'm just constantly, you know, and I've done some stuff in LA, and I'm like, oh, those women, they understand how to get rid of it. You know? They got something
we're
on
out here, and we know more. It's all good. All right. Well, Gabrielle, you really do seem like an incredible resource for anyone getting divorced, thinking about divorce. I mean, mediation. There's so many questions about mediation. So I really am grateful for you to speak to us and to have you as a Woolfer and in our corner. And we'll publish your piece of content, and everyone will learn from you. And tell us how people can find you on Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff.
So if you just go to GabrielleHartley.com, you're going to see it says getting divorced ? Divorce professional ? Just click on getting divorced. You can just message me, and you can find me. All of my social is right there, really, GabrielleHartley.com. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's Gabrielle Hartley ESQ, and on LinkedIn, it's just Gabrielle Hartley. So I love the Woolfer. I am such a big fan. I'm just learning how to navigate the app. Nina, I think you are just so badass, and everybody should love Nina. Give her all your love. Dream team. Like we need to let's make 50 cool.
I know. Well, we are. And lots of, I feel like there's so many interesting women doing interesting stuff.
I do too. It's amazing. It's like the best. Totally. Anyway, thank you so much. So